started working on this, and I say we because it's absolutely a collaborative exercise, and Sarah Handelman, who's at the back of the room, and I put together a design brief in October 2020, a really detailed design brief of 6 pages long. So we wanted to create an online community centred around a web-based open access resource that accumulates over time with extensive and deep content, and a resource that addresses gender parity in architectural education and culture production. And on my notes, I've got here the word manual, which I got from a text that Elizabeth wrote. So in a way, like a challenge to the manual, how can we change the situation so that there's more women in there and their voices are being heard? You can see the main elements of the site developed during the 6 months between making the brief and the launch, which it was on the 30th of June. So there are the citations, which is the main bibliography, which the site is composed of. And the list of citations is made in 2 ways. Through annotated texts, annotations, so where we invite people to suggest text and then write either short notes saying why they think it's important to them, and we were influenced a little bit by Sarah Ahmed's idea of companion text there, to really detailed narratives. And then the other way of adding to the bibliography is through the idea of collections. So they could be reading lists, or we've recently started talking to bookshops, like organisations as a way of kind of infiltrating how they put together their policies of buying books. And then also, and I don't know how many people have discovered this, because maybe it's a little bit difficult to see, you can make your own lists and share them with different people, maybe students or friends. But so it's almost the same time as launching the website. Drawing Matter published the 2nd edition of their extract series, and I think Pan Scroll Zoom, which is on the table, is also part of the extract series. That's number 3. And the extract series is about selecting texts that have been published on the Drawing Matter website and putting them together into a publication. So, I did the 2nd one, which is around women who'd been writing by women that appeared on the Drawing Matter website. Very, very simple. So anyway, there's a synergy between the 2. And this slide shows the Drawing Matter website and our website. So this is the first view of the front page of the website, of the Women Writing Architecture page. And so you can see down the centre is the bibliography, and on the 2 sides are the annotations on the right in green, and on the left is access to the collections. And this is the Drawing Matter collection, just to show. They were one of the earliest collections that was made on the site before the launch. So we felt that we had to really get together a lot of content before we launched, so that it actually was a thing when it became public. So this isn't from the website at all, but I just put this slide in to talk about organising knowledge and organising ideas. And I thought these 3 different types of botanic structural and propagation systems are quite good ways of talking about this. So on the left, there's the tree with its trunk and bifurcating branches and twigs, flowers and seeds, which for me is reminiscent of Enlightenment categorization systems. So a hierarchical structure that puts everything in its place. And so these systems are intended to be comprehensive, but define a place for everything within a fixed hierarchical structure. They also serve to name things. And naming is, of course, political, as Hegel pointed out. The first act by which Adam constituted his domination over animals was to give them a name. And I always like to counter this with something that the Mexican historian Edmundo O'Gorman said in his book, The Discovery of America, which was, it will be necessary to reconstruct history, not of the discovery of America, but rather the idea that America was discovered, which is not the same. So the image in the middle is the rhizome, which is familiar to everyone of a certain age, my age. The preferred analogy of French philosophers Deleuze and Guattari that they used to explain their concept of smooth and striated space, history and society. And I think what's similar about these two systems is that both of these constitute autonomous systems that can function independently of anything outside themselves. And in contrast to them is the mycorrhizal networks that exist in symbiosis with the roots of trees and connect different species in one entangled system. So that's, in a way, that third diagram is a kind of description of our intention for the website. You know, my question with this slide is, how can a project follow the logic of the mycorrhizal network? And so I think there is so much work to do to redefine history that includes weaving in narratives and new historical facts from previously excluded perspectives. And sometimes that means that separate exclusive strands developed, decolonised histories and feminist histories, for example. So intersectionality is a proposed solution, but it produces granular identities. So, you know, what we're kind of interested in is this notion of entanglement as a strategy for evading hierarchical values and preconceptions. So we start from the position of women's writing, but we want our results to mimic the mycorrhizal synthesis of different systems, to overlap with other perspectives that exist and are being found. So one of the most difficult tasks is to bring these other perspectives into the picture. The new architecture writers, how do we encourage them to contribute when they have so much work to do already? So this is one of our techniques for trying to sort of question this idea of naming. Finding these names and these categories of how we might search for kinds of writing on the site. And start to invite people to make different definitions of these terms. So, I mean, Paul Preciado features on our site quite a lot, an amazing writer. So I just stole a little piece of one of his books to define gender, combined that with the World Health Organization, then a little description that we wrote ourselves. So the glossary is one of the strategies for this. And here's a list of contributors. I think I had a look at it, and all of them on this list are women. But actually, you know, it's so important that people who identify themselves as men also can take part in the project, you know, by making annotations, by contributing collections, by them also thinking about the idea of women's writing, and what that might mean. And so here's one. It's you, Elizabeth. Sorry, you can't see it. But here's one of the people. I put you in to show how generous you've already been on the site. Elizabeth's made 5 annotations, and 3 texts written by her are featured within the bibliography. And this is our list of annotations. And there's Elizabeth right in the middle. And here's another annotation. And I've tried to do is like to make connections to people in the room. And so Laura, who you saw talking briefly about Patrick's book earlier, wrote this really sweet, nice annotation on purple hibiscus, and I don't know, we've started a little conversation about ways we might collaborate with her students in the future. And, you know, conversations with people is really, really a very, very important part about how we put the work together. Okay, this is another example of an annotation, a much more detailed one by Penelope Harandipalu, who did a whole project around the Book of the City of Ladies and made an exhibition about it. So, you know, just to show the idea that an annotation can be something that's very, very short or something that's incredibly long. You know, it could even be a book-length annotation, you know, in my fantasy world. And this is a list of collections. And you can see at the top we've also got this idea of naming different kinds of collections. So there's the syllabus, the bookshops, the curatorial process, the editorial. And this is the first collection that we ever made. So when Sarah and I were working on the brief together, we didn't actually think of collections. We only thought that we'd have the bibliography and the annotations. But then we thought, let's have a go at doing this round table discussion. So we thought we'd look at the idea of writing memory and each bring a text to the table and then ask each other questions and film it. And we ended up with this, and we also asked Emma Letizia Jones to join in. And then we realised that actually that was quite a really efficient way of putting text onto the list, much more efficient than the to and fro, which is still very valuable, of encouraging people to write annotations. But you could actually put together huge lists. So I looked at the RIBA library catalogue, which has a classification number for women in architecture, and made a collection of that. And then I was talking to the librarian at ETH, and she said, I could do that. And she put together a classification number, which she's then going to take to her boss and suggested it happens in the library. So there are many different ways that the site can kind of infiltrate and suggest ways of promoting women's writing. What's this? So these are two different kinds of collection. The bookshops who we've just started to talk to, in a way of making a mapping of bookshops around the world, but also again this idea of having a conversation with them about. I mean, even still, when you look at a bookshop's website, most of the new books have male authors. Weirdly, I'm surprised, but I was just talking to a shop in Melbourne called Metropolis Bookshop, and they said they have a list that they call Sisters in Architecture. So that's going to become a collection. And then on the right, what's that list? That's syllabi, to try and encourage people to send their syllabuses into us. Because I think that, in the summer and the beginning of the semester when everyone's trying to put together their book lists, it's actually really quite helpful to have a look at what other people have put on their lists. And then this last bit is about to how you make your own collections. And so I did a little bit of work with this Tim Collett in Nottingham, and he wanted to do something. He was going to call it Pioneering Women. I said, but do you have to have women in the title? And he said no. So he changed the title, but we started to make this list of texts that were related to the women that he was interested in, and we had a day of discussion where the students were presenting their work, and all of the time they were using she. It was so amazing to sit in a room talking about architects for the whole day, and it was always, and she thinks, and she said, and this is what she did, and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I mean, I've never ever experienced that. So many she's, it was brilliant. And then this is to show that this is the page when you say send it to people, then you can send it by email, Twitter it or Facebook. I don't do either of those things. And you can also submit it to the editors, and then that would initiate a dialogue about how you might make the collection part of the website. It's also possible to make suggestions. Really, the suggestions need to have a note or an annotation, but that also can be developed in dialogue with us. So it's very, very hard to see at the moment. It's right at the top of the list. Submit a suggestion, and then this is the page that comes up, and then that's how you submit it. I'm just showing you, so you might, if you go to the website, you might have a go. And that's the end of the show. And I won't leave this on because it might make you go crazy while we're talking. But I just wanted, I put on the bottom, I put the address of the website and the Instagram that we have, so that if you want to go, that's how you get there.
As I was listening and having looked at the website and contributed to it, one of the things that struck me about it is that a lot of the entries on it are journal articles, they're books, they're written things, they're hard copies of stuff like that, all of which, or the majority of which, are written by women or about women. And I wondered, as a starting point, there's lots of other things I have in mind, like canons and messy histories and entangled histories, which we can come on to. I'm wondering what it is particularly about the digital, the website, how that might get to the task of really embedding the so many she's in architectural culture, because I think, and maybe this is something also to come back to, that's the kind of goal of what all of this kind of activity is about. So what does the digital do that maybe in and of themselves all the texts which are being referenced in the website maybe don't?
Well, there were two strands that I could answer that. Firstly, like the kind of practical one is that the digital isn't just written. You can also hear people's voices and have oral histories, and you can see films. And so, yeah, I mean, like, one of our intentions was with the three terms, women and writing and history, women and writing and architecture, is that each one has very, very elastic boundaries. So, there is an intention to question each one of those terms. So thinking about writing, that's why that came up. So writing can also be film, and it can also be spoken word. So, it's actually like you can challenge that on the site. And we do, I think actually the very first annotation that I did was, I went to see a friend of mine, Liza Fior, who's really good at talking. And I asked her the question and about, what book would you have? And she said, I think what I'd really, really like is A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Thank you very much. So we had a really long, rambling conversation about it with many bits of advice here and there. And then I edited it down to about 5 minutes. And that is on the site, is Liza kind of connecting. I think it's really, really interesting. And she had a particular chapter of that book. And she gave me the book as a gift, and I read it. And the chapter that she chose gives so much insight. I know her quite well, but so I could make that connection. But gave me an incredible amount of insight into her practice and how that connected to her biographically. But and that comes out in the recording, actually, because I could edit it so that it explained that. So, and then also when we did the first collection. Sarah and Emma Letizia Jones, Sarah Handelman and Emma Letizia Jones. We also did videos and answered questions. I think that because really we've been spending so much time having conversations with people, we haven't really been exploring fully the actual potential of the digital in that sense. But then there's the kind of like the political possibility of the digital, which for me is extremely important in that. You can, again, it actually connects to a project I did with Liza, but the digital is democratic. You don't need capital to publish with a digital, and I think that's really, really an important thing to me. So you don't have to be party to anybody's. Whims, a wealthy person's whims, or a wealthy institution or a funding body. You can just do something. You need a very small amount of money to actually start having a voice. I think this has been said, something that's been said for like 20 years. But, I find that incredibly exciting. So, I've actually been thinking about for a long time how you can use that potential of the digital, that you don't need capital, that you can actually have a voice. It just has to be. You have to think about how you do it so it is effective. And I have worked in many different places where I've gradually learned how that can be effective. And drawing matter is one of them, but there are many before that too.
Is there a sense that I always think that our students now are kind of digital natives? So is this a happy place for them to go in a way maybe the old school library isn't, and this is perhaps the way forward in trying to make women's writings, women's voices audible and visible, because it seems to me, as someone who's been doing this for quite a long time, 30 plus years, and trying to write history differently, trying to kind of get different voices represented, there always seems to be an element of surprise when the most recent book about a woman architect or women in architecture is published or whatever, as if it's something new. And I'm wondering whether there's something about the printed word or the mechanisms through which that's disseminated just don't function in our world anymore, and that the digital is the way to do that. I don't know.
Again, I've got two thoughts. I'm being a bit binary today. One is that the site is much more hand-wrought than I thought it would be, in that I was really hoping that we'd be able to build up this spontaneous community by people sending in lots of stuff. But I've realised that everything that occurs on the site is a product of a conversation, which actually is a really, really precious thing. I realised that one of the precious things about the site isn't this spontaneous community that I was imagining, you know, rippling out in different levels, but the conversations and shared ideas that come out of the process of gathering materials. That's one aspect. And the second one is actually we can't really track people on the site at all. We can see which countries people are in, and to me that is really, really important, because I think I don't know about students. I mean, what we're doing is we're actually talking to individual people and asking and seeing how they see the site and engage with it. So again, it's on that really, really handcrafted level of observation, very, very personal. But for me, what I'm really fascinated, I mean, it is about women's imagination, but I'm just so interested in how history is put together in other countries in the world. And I think using women as a mechanism, the idea of women as a mechanism for doing that, is actually really very, very valuable, in that because it's not the given canon, wherever that is, in China or Australia or Russia or Chile or Argentina, because it's not the given canon. It has to be conceptualized. If you're talking about women's presence there, so it's actually, I don't know how to describe it. I do find, I mean, because it's having to be conceptualized in that moment, it actually becomes a thing. So you have people, I can see that there are quite a lot of people in South Africa at the moment, maybe because they're having to stay indoors, I don't know, looking at the site. And again, I talked to a young student from Korea, and she gave me some really amazing leads on how to represent Korean history of architecture. So, yeah. Yeah,
so as you were talking, I was thinking, I mean, one of the things that thinking of women in architecture, certainly from a white Western female perspective, which is not a representative perspective at all, but nevertheless it has the potential to sort of splinter and to interrogate and to deconstruct what one might have been taught 30 years ago when you were sitting in an art history or an architectural history lecture in at the Bartlett or UCL, where I went, as a student. So the category woman, however it's constructed, is inherently deconstructive, if you will. And I'm wondering how we can kind of build on that and how that fits with your desire to kind of maybe unpick a canon in the website, which I think is one of its intentions, and also how we kind of try and accommodate that. And I was going to say contain it, but maybe it's not containable. And how your sort of systems of knowledge, how we go from that very Western Enlightenment kind of, I suppose it makes me realise that as the more I try and reorder my history writing and make it messy and entangled, I'm still trying to impose an order. And how do we get to is there a stage where we can write a diverse, inclusive history which is somehow more representative, or is that impossible? And is the website a model for that, because it's so open and it's so potentially accessible and globally accessible? If that's a question.
I don't think a single history is possible, personally.
No.
I think having access to the means to make your own order is very important, and I guess it's about that what you have access to isn't just a canon from where, I mean, the thing that I've been I think we've been coming from different directions for the last 25 years. So like the Western, the European, North American canon of art history and architectural history, I think it is quite a defined thing with its origins in classical architecture. Sorry, I've lost my track, but. No, I mean, I've always been interested in challenging that. But so what you need to have is a field from which you can make your order that isn't just restricted to that very, very specific canon. It isn't the objective history. It's something very, 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 very specific. And so, which is why... this idea that there are other canons or other ways of constructing history that nobody's ever bothered to really engage with. It's really difficult to access those because you have to how do you work out the mechanisms and ways of imagining that enable you to even start having those conversations that encourage other people then to participate. And that, I mean, for me, that's the biggest challenge actually is that. We have our friends, we can ask them, but how do we move outside of that field?
Yeah, because I was thinking which on one level goes back to ideas about maybe, I can't think of a better word than containment, but or how you manage that in order that it can be transmitted in the architecture studio, in the field, in the world out there, because it can be a very insular set of conversations, and it's a shame that all these amazing new voices don't get heard. And what's the shift that has to take place to get those what are marginalised voices and not seen and not heard voices? Who needs to be listening harder? Who needs to be looking harder? Because I think I think there's been a lot of pushing and a lot of really magnificently imaginative work, but there's some very powerful people who are doing this a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question I'd also like to reflect back to you, because I know that you've been thinking about it a lot too. But I mean, I think getting men to take part is actually really, really crucial, and I think that's a problem with a lot of female-led projects, is that men see them and they feel that they're not invited, and they are really, really invited to take part in this project. I mean, it's very desired that their voices are heard as annotators, as people contributing collections. But in the last month or so, men that I know have been coming up to me and they've got amazing ideas. I was talking to this young guy who's doing some research on Anthony Blunt and the Courtauld, and he's come across these two women who are at the Courtauld who I've never heard of, and he was really super enthusiastic about them, and he wants to do a whole piece of writing about them, and so that's great. And then I was talking to Daniel Rossbottom, and he said, I've got an idea that I could, that you could have as an annotation, and he started to talk to me about what he'd write about Hilary Mantel, and I felt like I got to know him so much better through this incredibly sensitive, interesting observation that he's making about it. So I think he just need to be inviting for long enough and to keep saying it, and then and. And showing where men are, I haven't done that today, but showing where men have made annotations, and, as an example, it's interesting. It's like they need their mentors on the site to encourage them to take part in the,
Yeah, so there's a sense of, again, we've got to wind up now, but I just wonder whether the digital gives that possibility, because in a way, the digital is... you can be anonymous, but it's a way of being present but not present, which again perhaps allows multiple actors on the kind of digital stage, and maybe the transition needs to be people actively doing that in commissioning and inviting people and stocking library shelves and writing bibliographies and using this, and male tutors, actively thinking, well, I'm going to put a book on my reading list. Let's have 5 by women and do it that way. Maybe that's the way forward.
I tell you, when you said about being anonymous, I had a fantasy about how you could make up characters for yourself on the side.
Why not?
As an annotator, but you could do that definitely. But I think one of the interesting things, it's almost like doing something and seeing what happens, because that we did have some intentions, and like as I said about the idea of the spontaneous community, which didn't happen, but then there's the discovery of the nurture community, which is really, really interesting. But it actually seems to be something which wasn't explicitly intended, but it becomes a mechanism of it becomes like not a weapon, a mechanism of agency, maybe, of being able to say to your boss, look at this, and I think that is quite an exciting thing actually for me.
So it's a liberating device, because it's there and you can move
a device. It becomes a device. So in the way that the bibliography becomes something that you can order yourself, it becomes a device that you can use in any way you choose.
From the sort of grassroots up, which is
exactly.
Sounds like a good moment to end on. Thank you, Helen. That was fun. Thank you.